Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's jump straight into it today. We are exploring the dynamic, highly interconnected global system that governs heliports. If you've ever stood near a helipad and wondered about the invisible rules that keep those incredibly complex machines landing safely time and time again, you're about to discover a genuinely fascinating world. It's absolutely not just about painting a giant H on the ground. It's about a massive international framework designed to ensure that every single flight, every single time, is as safe as humanly possible. Think of a local helipad as the absolute center of a gigantic web. It sits right in the middle of all these international treaties, safety standards, and regulations. It's surrounded by nodes like safety management, aviation security, meteorological services, accident investigation, and honestly, so much more. And the thing is, all of those elements point inward to that one single landing spot. Heliports literally do not exist in a vacuum. They operate within this much wider global aviation system, developed by the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO. So, how do we get from a global concept to a physical helipad? Well, it's a journey. 1, it all starts way back in 1944 with the Chicago Convention. 2, that leads to the establishment of the ICAO organization. 3, ICAO creates the annexes, which contain the SARPs. 4, individual states implement those rules. 5, national authorities oversee them. And 6, the heliport operation actually applies them on the ground. What that journey creates is one continuous, unbroken chain of responsibility. It flows all the way from a high-level global treaty straight down to local, day-to-day operations. Now, here is the absolutely crucial detail. ICAO provides the global framework, sure, but ICAO doesn't enforce it directly. It's the individual states that take that framework and weave it into their legal systems. And ultimately, it's the people on the ground, the operators, the pilots, the ground crews, that make it work safely. Those standards, the SARPs, they aren't self-executing. They totally rely on this shared responsibility to become reality. Now, when we start talking about the specific rules for the actual landing areas, we have to look at ICAO Annex 14. But wait, there is a super important distinction to make here, because Annex 14 is actually split in two. Volume 1 deals with aerodromes, so think of your traditional airports with big runways and taxiways meant for fixed-wing and mixed operations. Volume 2, however, is our dedicated rulebook specifically for heliports. That covers all the locations and environments where helicopters operate exclusively. So while Volume 1 is out there handling vast runways and sprawling terminal buildings for fixed-wing aircraft, Volume 2 zeroes in entirely on the unique geometry and the very specific requirements of heliports. But even though fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft have these separate rulebooks dictating their physical infrastructure, they remain completely complementary. Brought together under one global standard, these two volumes are the essential building blocks for supporting safe, secure, and sustainable aeronautical safety across the whole globe. Let's zoom in on Volume 2 specifically for a second. This is literally the heliport reference for the world. It establishes those standards and recommended practices, again, the SARPs, for the physical characteristics of the space. We're talking about the final approach and takeoff areas, known as FADOs, and the touchdown and liftoff areas, the TOLFs. It lays down the law for obstacle environments, which ensures that approach and takeoff paths are actually clear and safe. It covers all the visual aids, like beacons and lighting, and even mandates the necessary equipment and services, like fire protection. This right here is the global baseline for the physical space itself. Okay, so we've got the physical space perfectly defined by Annex 14. You might be sitting there thinking, great, we have everything we need, right? But is Annex 14 the whole picture? If you go out and build the absolute perfect helipad down to the millimeter, does that guarantee a safe flight? No way. The short answer is no. A heliport's physical infrastructure is really only half of the equation. And that brings us to this highly symbiotic relationship. Annex 14 Volume 2 defines the place, the concrete, the physical infrastructure, the lights. But then we have Annex 6, specifically Part 3 for international helicopter operations. Annex 6 defines the operation. It dictates how the aircraft and the flight crew actually conduct themselves. So we are talking flight planning, weather minima, communication protocols. You just cannot have one without the other. They are intimately connected by the mission. Safe operations demand both the right place, which is Annex 14, and the right way to operate, which is Annex 6, Part 3. But wait, there's more. Beyond Annexes 6 and 14, there's this whole wider ecosystem of supporting annexes. We've got Annex 1 for personnel licensing, Annex 2 for rules of the air, Annex 3 handles the meteorological services, weather. Annex 10 is for telecoms, and Annex 11 covers air traffic. The ecosystem even extends outward to Annexes 12, 13, 15, 17, 18, and 19, which cover everything from search and rescue to dangerous goods and safety management systems. But, and this is an incredibly important note to make, just because an annex is relevant does not mean every single provision applies identically to every single heliport. All these distinct annexes basically form a protective ring around the heliport, reinforcing that wider safety ecosystem. But remember that caveat we just talked about? Applicability depends entirely on the type of operation, the specific environment, and exactly how the state has implemented those rules. A remote private helipad out in the country is not going to apply these provisions in the exact same way that a massive, high-volume international airport helipad would. It is all about context and shared responsibility across a very complex network. Actually, let's clear up another really frequent point of confusion right now. What exactly is the difference between an ICAO Annex and an ICAO Manual? Well, ICAO Annex 14, Volume 2 contains legally authoritative standards. It tells the states the what and the why for compliance. It's the rulebook. On the other hand, we have ICAO Document 9261, which is the Heliport Manual. This document is supporting guidance, it's educational in nature, and it explains the how and the when. The distinction here is actually crystal clear. The Annex sets the rigid, global baseline standards that are mandatory for states. It sets the bar. But the Heliport Manual, that illustrates the best practices. It provides the explanatory material, real-world examples, and the recommended methods to help designers and operators actually implement those standards effectively in reality. So you use the Annex for compliance, but you dive into the manual for deep understanding. Together, they ensure much safer operations. So, stepping back, how does all this high-level global theory actually become local, everyday reality? Let's trace that final cascade. 1. It begins at the top with the international ICAO framework. 2. States adopt this into their national law. 3. The National Aviation Authority issues the specific regulations. 4. The facility undergoes assessment and gets its approval. 5. The operator establishes specific operating arrangements, like risk controls. And finally, step 6, it reaches the people on the ground who are following local procedures every single day. This cascade is just so vital because different environments absolutely require different implementation paths. Whether we are looking at an airport heliport, a hospital helipad, a rooftop location, an offshore helideck, or a shipboard landing area, the baseline ICAO standards apply to all of them. However, the National Aviation Authority is going to require very different risk management and operational procedures for a hospital in a dense, crowded city compared to an offshore oil rig in the middle of the ocean. Compliance is merely the baseline. Achieving a safe operational reality, carefully tailored to the context, is always the ultimate goal. If there is just one thing you take away from this explainer today, let it be this. Don't stop at Annex 14. Understand the whole framework. True aviation safety isn't found by just looking at a single document or pointing at a single painted circle on the ground. It requires seeing and respecting the entire interconnected regulatory picture, from those massive global treaties all the way down to the local pilot's decision-making in the cockpit. And hey, speaking of different environments, we are going to dive even deeper into one of the most complex operational contexts out there in our next explainer, helicopters at airports. We are going to explore exactly how these incredibly agile machines integrate safely into the massive, high-speed infrastructure that was designed primarily for fixed-wing aircraft. It is a fascinating operational ballet, and I literally can't wait to break it down with you. See you then!